Thank you for joining us for Map It Out. I'm thrilled to introduce our presenter, Shannon Lannis, mStoner's content strategist. Shannon works to make sure great content and amazing design coexist in every mStoner project. She crafts persuasive digital stories for our clients that are informed by their business goals, as well as mStoner's market research and effective audience engagement methods. Shannon is adept at creating new content as well as reimagining existing content to help an institution tell its story in fresh, efficient, and captivating ways. Prior to mStoner, Shannon spent 5 years working in film and TV development for Harpo Films, DreamWorks, Animation TV, and Disney. Current mStoner clients include Northeastern College of Engineering, Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame, Lipscomb University, and Aurora University. Shannon, I'll turn the session over to you. Let's get started.
Great, thank you so much, Mallory. So I want to get started today just by outlining what our goals are for today. First is really, some of you may be familiar with experience maps already. For some of you, this may be your first time talking about them. Our goal really is to provide you with useful and actionable information and ideas for your upcoming digital content projects, whatever those may be. We're going to be talking a lot about the prospective student journey today through the admissions process. So I'm sure a lot of this information will be familiar. Really what we're trying to do here is affirm what you think you know and remind you of what you may have forgotten. So the topics that we'll cover today, we're going to start with what is an experience map. We're going to define experience maps. We're going to look at the elements that go into them. Then we're going to talk about the 7 benefits of experience mapping. And this might be why should you create an experience map? Why should you use an experience map? And then finally, we're going to talk about the 7 ways that you can use your map to build engagement with prospective students with digital content. So let's get started. So first, I think it'll be helpful just to start with a definition. Let's establish a shared definition for what an experience map is. And what we're talking about today is really, it's a way to visualize the customer journey. Adaptive Path was one of the first companies to start using experience maps and evangelizing them, and I really like this definition that they put together. This is from their guide to experience mapping, saying experience mapping is a strategic process of capturing and communicating complex customer interactions. So again, our goal is to visualize the customer journey. We're going to do that by capturing customer interactions and then communicating those customer interactions. So why should we do this? What does this matter for higher ed? Well, at mStoner, we look at the path that a prospective student takes to enrolling in an institution as a complex sale. A complex sale is a highly emotional decision. Think of buying a house or buying a car. For, let's say we're talking about a house, you might look at a number of housing options for different reasons, things like price, maybe your commute to work, you're interested in a particular location, but at the end of the day, whether unconsciously or consciously, a lot of times it really just comes down to you pick the one that feels right in some way. So on the one side here, you've got a student who's moving through the phases of this complex sale. On the other side, there's your content strategy, and this is the vision that guides your content. What kinds of content you're creating, what you want that content to do, where you're going to put it, how you're going to create it, and really, if you want to build the most engaging digital content, the content that's really going to move students through that prospective sale, you need to have an understanding of the user journey. And that's the sort of intersection of these 2 ideas where your audience is interacting with your content. And the map, again, really helps us visualize that. So we know that the complex sale from our research at mStoner can be divided into 4 phases: understand and explore, narrow choices and apply, decide and accept, and commit and transition. We're going to talk in detail about what happens in each of these phases, but first, just to understand at a high level, there's 4 phases, and then within each phase, what we do is we capture and document thoughts, feelings, and actions specific to that phase. So we want to understand and document what are the thoughts prospective students are having, what are they feeling, and what actions are they taking. And we do this so that we can then translate that directly into messages that we want to communicate and opportunity. That could be end of digital opportunity. We're going to talk about later in the webinar about what some opportunities might be and how you can use this map. So first, When you see this, please know this map is going to be part of the resource bundle that you're going to receive when the webinar recording becomes available. So this map will absolutely be available for you to download. We're going to go into each section in more detail so you'll be able to see it. I know it looks like a big, messy map right now, and it's got a lot of information. We're going to dig into it. So what you're seeing here is an example of an experience map that we developed at mStoner. And this map represents our consolidated findings from 17 years of research and work with hundreds of institutions, everything from large public universities to small private liberal arts colleges, community colleges, and everything in between. And the map that you're seeing right now, this map captures at a high level the sort of prototypical prospective journey, a prospective student journey that can be applied to any of these different kinds of institutions. But so while I'm really showing you the map here, I want to make the point too that this map that you're seeing is just a starting point. We absolutely recommend customizing it and tailoring it to your institution. In fact, we've actually worked with a number of institutions to customize the map in a way that really serves their needs. For instance, we've worked with the University of Montreal to focus on the international student journey. And recently we've worked with Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame to customize the map to focus on prospective business students and what those different audience segments might look like. So I want to just show you a little bit about how this map is put together. Up here you have the 4 stages. This represents the 4 phases of the prospective student journey that we talked about: that understand and explore, narrow choices and apply, decide and accept, and commit and transition. And then down here, you'll see that we've captured thoughts, feelings, and actions that are specific to each phase. And what's great about this map is it puts that all side by side, so you can see how thoughts change over time, how feelings change over time, and what the different actions are that take place in each phase through the journey, and you can see how students move through that journey. Then down here, we've got our trusted sources of information. What this is this captures where prospective students are going to get information about your institution. And then down here, we have opportunities. And this is really where you decide how you want to use the map, what kinds of opportunities you want to capture. So for instance, we'll talk a lot about one way that we use the map frequently is to plan for key messages that we want to communicate throughout the student journey. A lot of times we'll use it to explore and capture content ideas for a website. So we're going to talk a lot as the webinar goes on about different ways that you can use the space, different kinds of opportunities that you can capture. So let's talk a little bit about those 4 phases that I mentioned. First, understand and explore. This is the phase, it's the first phase. It really captures the time at which a prospective student becomes interested in your institution and starts to figure out what are they looking for in a college or university. So again, thoughts, feelings, and actions in this phase. The thoughts include, why do I want to do this? What programs are right for me? How do I compare my options financially? We see feelings of apprehension. I need to make sure I get my applications in on time, but also feelings of hopefulness. You know, maybe I found some places that feel right. I'm excited about this. I'm closing in on a choice. And we definitely see a lot of annoyance in this phase too, especially as students are sorting through the mail, all that paper. So I mentioned some of these actions already. We see students in this phase sorting the mail. We see them reviewing your website, engaging in social, and they're also spending a lot of time talking to their influencers to figure out what's the right choice for them. So trusted sources of information in this phase include your college and university website, your .edu. We know from our myth-busting research that your website is your #1 digital marketing tool. We know that it's the most trusted source of digital communication with prospective students. But we also know that students are looking at your print material, they're looking at third-party sites, they're Googling. And I mentioned those trusted influencers. That includes parents, it includes family, friends, as well as high school counselors. So I mentioned you can really take the map and look for any kind of opportunity that you want, whether that's content for your website, content for an email, for social, etc. But at a sort of high level, the opportunities in this that are specific and unique to this phase, this is really the time that students are meeting your institution for the first time. So what you really want to do here is establish your brand and emphasize your brand differentiators. Who are you and how are you different from your competition? You also, for some institutions, it becomes really important to build a case for value and affordability up front. This is also the time when it can be really important. I mean, it's important throughout the journey, but especially right up front to promote your programs. So then we move to the second phase, narrow choices and apply. And this is the phase in which students are starting to make their shortlist and they're actually putting their applications together. So the thoughts in this phase, we start to see students comparing institutions side by side a little bit more closely. So it includes thoughts like, what's the right balance of size, cost, and location? Where will I get the best research experience? Will I be able to study abroad? We see a wider range of feelings in this phase, everything from excitement and empowerment to some confusion as they're trying to assess what the right choice is for them and what the differences and similarities are between maybe some different institutions that they're looking at. We also see a sense of anticipation. This is going to be difficult, but it could be fun. And we see quite a bit of fear here. And that really goes down to students who are like, maybe I'm not really sure what I want to do. I know this is a big choice for me and for my life, and I'm really sort of scared of making the wrong choice, picking the wrong institution, selecting the wrong major. The actions that we see in this phase, this is where we start to see a little bit more person-to-person contact. So things like talking to professors, talking to admissions counselors and alumni. If students are going to visit campus, this is the phase in which they typically do it. We also see students start to review financial aid and scholarship opportunities in a little bit more detail, and all the way through to actually putting that application together and submitting it. So the trusted sources of information in this phase are actually really similar to the first phase. Again, it's your website, it's your print materials, it's those third-party sites, and the same trusted sources of information in terms of people, parents, family, friends, counselors. And so the opportunities in this phase, if you spent the first phase establishing your brand and establishing what your brand differentiators are, this is the phase in which you can address any misperceptions and make sure, if you want to clear up any confusion about how your institution is being perceived, this is the time you get to do that. And then the other major opportunity in this phase is really to demystify the process of putting an application together, of what the financial aid process looks like. This becomes particularly important for first-generation students who might not have that knowledge in their families. You have a real opportunity to guide them through the process. Then once that application is submitted, we get to a phase that's called decide and accept. And this captures the time in which students are waiting to hear back from institutions about admission, about financial aid, and when they ultimately choose an offer for admission. So the thoughts in this phase, in the last phase we saw students visiting campus. In this phase we see students reflecting back on that visit or reflecting back on the person-to-person interaction that they've had with your institution, and really thinking about, what was my experience like? What was my experience like with current students, with the faculty, with the staff and counselors? How do I feel about the people there? Do I feel like I would fit in? Is this going to be the right place for me? We also start to see students thinking a little bit more concretely about what their life is going to be like outside of the classroom. And the feelings here, not surprisingly, there's a ton of anxiety, especially during the wait. I can't stand the waiting. I can't wait to hear. And then there's that thrill of like, I got in, I'm so excited. The interesting thing here is we also see a tremendous need for validation. Students are starting to find out where their friends got in, and they want to know, like, am I going to the right place? Are my peers going to approve of where I'm choosing to go? Who else is going? There's a sense of confidence that, oh my gosh, I'm making the right choice here. But we also see doubt. Am I making the right choice? I'm not totally sure. And we see some frustration in this phase, particularly around the financial aid process. So the actions I mentioned, waiting to hear about acceptance, waiting for acceptance letters, waiting for financial aid awards. We see students re-engaging in social in this phase, again, for that sense of validation. Am I making the right choice here? For community college students, a lot of times we see this is where they start to ask themselves, is this really the right time to go back to school? Is this really what I want to do right now? And we also see, again, comparing the pros and cons of maybe you got into multiple institutions, comparing those a little bit more closely and directly, ultimately to accepting an offer for admission. So the trusted resources in this phase are not totally dissimilar, but we see a greater emphasis on official and personal social media accounts. Again, parents, family, and friends. We also see admissions counselors play a bigger role here, as well as admitted student days, and for some students, return visits to campus. So the opportunities in this phase, again, I mentioned it's a very anxiety-ridden time for prospective students. So your biggest opportunity is really how you ease things us, and also how can you reaffirm reasons to choose your institution. We know students are looking for validation, so this is the time you get to remind them why they were so excited about applying to your college or university in the first place. And then finally, the final stage we call commit and transition. And this is when students move from being admitted students to actually being current students on campus. So the thoughts in this phase include, how do I prepare for this transition? What do I need to know? What am I forgetting? We get to a lot more sort of tactical information at this point. Feelings include relief, I've gotten in somewhere, but also impatience, okay, I got in somewhere, I'm ready to start. And then with that sort of big life change on the horizon, we do see some ambivalence. There's a lot of big changes ahead. I feel good, I feel bad about it. There's kind of this interesting mix of emotions. And I'm just getting I'm so excited to start. I can't wait. Let's get going. So the actions in this phase include students investigating their housing options and selecting housing. They're making their deposit, they're registering for classes, and this is where they start getting in touch with other admitted students, the people who are going to be their classmates. We see a great desire here, again, for that person-to-person interaction, but here they're looking to connect with other students to get a sense of what's it going to be like for the next 4 or however many years. And finally, to moving in and being a current student. So again, I mentioned that sort of connection between students becomes really important in this phase. So a big trusted resource is any recently accepted student sites, as well as student life sites and orientation packets, as they're just trying to imagine and understand what their life is going to be like during this transition once they become a current student. So your opportunity here, again, I mentioned there's a lot of tactical information that needs to be communicated here. You can really ease that process by providing clear, actionable information, checklists, really clear dates and deadlines. You can also facilitate those connections with something like an admitted student site and really orient students to their new world. Give them a sense of what it's going to be like and how they can best prepare. So those are the 4 different phases in a little bit more detail. And again, you'll see they sort of ladder up to this bigger map that you'll have a chance to download and explore in more detail and customize for your institution. So I mentioned customizing is a really valuable way to make the map work for your specific institution. I wanted to at least touch on sort of how you might do that. A lot of times we recommend doing experience map workshops, and that's when you bring in key stakeholders for your project into one room, as well as your subject matter experts, and you just start brainstorming what goes in each phase. You can see here, this is an example. These are photos we from experience from the College of Business, and you'll see people writing down notes on stickies, putting them up, organizing them. It's really a very collaborative process that allows you to capture a lot of information. So why would you want to do this? What's the benefit of experience mapping? Why should you use these? Let's get into what the 7 benefits are. The first is really, the map really helps you develop understanding and empathy. It helps you get to know your audience on a deeper level. You see what they're seeing, you understand what they're feeling, and what this does is this helps you create authentic and meaningful digital experiences because they resonate because they're focused on what your audience wants and needs. Second, I mentioned experience map workshops. You get a bunch of people in a room, work on a map together. What you're doing is creating alignment through a shared frame of reference. You're bringing in your key stakeholders, your subject matter experts. It helps everybody take a look at your project from, first of all, with a shared understanding of what the student journey is, but also to look at your project with the same lens and the same assumptions. Building on that, a shared understanding of the student journey also can help your institution start to see your content efforts in a more user-centered way. And it's not uncommon, for example, we see institutions structuring their website in a way that directly matches their internal organization. And while this may work for your internal audience and internal constituents, it's not always intuitive for prospective students. So I'm thinking of one instance, for instance, it might be academic information about your programs. Sometimes we see prospective students don't totally understand or may not totally understand how a particular school or department is organized. They don't understand how to navigate your internal structure. They really just want to know, do you have the major that I'm looking for? Do you have the program that I'm looking for? So using the map to kind of shift your focus to the users and a sort of user-centric approach really helps you organize your content in a way that matches students' mental model. So if you're putting a map together collaboratively in a workshop setting, I would encourage you to reach out to the people who are talking to those prospective students on a regular basis. Maybe those are admissions counselors, people who are picking up the phone and answering questions that come from students and family. What that does is, if you bring those people into the room to help you flesh out the experience map, you're starting to collect institutional knowledge of behaviors and needs. You're learning a little bit more about what are the top questions that your students are asking, students interested in your institution. Maybe there are actions they take that are unique and specific to your institution, or feelings they have along the way that you want to make sure that you capture so that you can create content that addresses it later on. And again, if you're building a map collaboratively, inevitably, some or all of the people working on the map are going to start to see areas for you to improve in terms of digital communications, whether that's information on your site that's unclear or hard to find. Maybe you're starting to see opportunities to build out more meaningful email campaigns, how to use social in a more effective way. The map can really help you both understand and then start to document the areas where you want to improve, where you want to put your resources and energy. And then sort of the other side of that, the map allows you to then start to prioritize those efforts. So maybe you're at the beginning of a website redesign and you have all kinds of different ideas for what you want to put on the website. Well, the map can help you really drill down and focus on how to prioritize those efforts, what's going to be most meaningful to support the prospective student journey. Where should that information be, in what phase? And then finally, the map gives you a living artifact as a tool. If you've done a full experience map workshop, you're going to leave with a set of key messages and opportunities that are going to get your team thinking about all the different kinds of great content that you can use and create to engage prospective students. I would encourage you to keep using the map over time, that it's not an end in and of itself, that it's a tool to help you use when you want to start evaluating new ideas. And you can sort of look back and say, okay, look, these are the priorities we set. These are the goals that we agreed to. And if your institution's priorities change for some reason, you can go back and edit the map. That's the great advantage of having this living tool. So big picture, really what the experience map is getting you to do is it's getting you to shift your focus from a focus on the institution to a focus on your customer. And why would you want a customer-centered approach? Well, it really helps you build individualized experiences for your prospective students, experiences that are going to be more engaging because they're more tailored. It's going to help you create a seamless journey across each phase, and it's going to really help you looking at the journey in total with holistic planning for your digital efforts. So you're going to look at content that's specific to one phase, and then you're able to look at how this ladders up to a holistic content plan as a whole. So that's why you would want to use a map. But let's talk about what are some ways to actually use the map to build engagement. We're going to talk about 7 ways in particular. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what does that mean to build better engagement? What does it mean to make great engaging content that starts to build a relationship with prospective students? Well, I've identified a few qualities here that I think are helpful in sort of informing that. First, content that builds engagement is relevant, which means it speaks to the questions that prospective students have. It answers what they want to know. Also, second, information that builds engagement is timely. It comes at the right place in the journey. It's also consistent and accurate, meaning you are using the same tone across your different touch points. It also means that you're going to be able to find the same information about your institution in print and in digital. That information isn't going to contradict itself in any way. If you pick up the phone and call somebody, you're not necessarily going to get a different answer than if you look up something on your institution's website. And finally, engaging content is empathetic. So if relevant content speaks to the thoughts that prospective students have and the questions that they have, empathetic content speaks to what they're feeling, their hopes, aspirations, fears throughout the journey, that it speaks to their hearts and their emotions a little bit more. So how do we actually do that? Well, the first way that you can use your map is to frame your institution's narrative. What's the story that you want to tell about your institution? What are the messages that you want to communicate, and what's the order of those messages? Maybe you want to lead with rankings and reputation. Maybe you're more interested in communicating value and affordability up front. There's no right answer to this, but using the map will help you start to plan for the order of those messages, and you can see how they ladder up to the larger narrative that you're telling about your institution. We worked with one institution recently where we built an experience map and then used that to plan out an email campaign. What that did is it allowed us to make sure that we were sending emails, that this institution was sending emails at a relevant and timely point in the prospective student journey, so that each email would speak to the phase that that student was in, and then we could look at the email campaign as a whole to sort of talk about what story are we telling about our institution, what's the narrative here, are there any pieces that are missing. The other opportunity that I would point out here, the way that you can use a map to build a narrative, is with a tool that we call the homepage story frame. So a story frame, very basically, all it is a text-based outline of page content that uses story elements. So I have a screenshot here from the University of North Dakota. They just launched their website earlier this week. And when we were very first starting strategy, before we got to design, before we got to copywriting, we just wrote out in natural language, what did we want this page to communicate? And the reason that we did that is, so first you write out what you want the page to communicate, and then you start bringing in story elements. So this isn't going to be like a once upon a time kind of story. You're not creating a movie and putting it out the homepage of your website, but you do want to pull in story elements because it makes your content more engaging. And what are those story elements? It could be something like using consistent themes, creating a really distinct setting, and including memorable characters as a way to communicate what your institution has to offer. So here, for the University of North Dakota, for instance, for them, communicating the idea that this is a place that you will become a leader and you will be able to make an impact, that really informed the story that we wanted to tell on the homepage. So before copywriting took place, we sort of started to write out, what are those key messages? How can we build in story elements? How can we use our homepage to tell a story about what our institution is and what it offers? So you'll see once we actually got to copywriting, words like impact are going to be in here. It's going to talk about your impact on the world starts now. Pursue your goals, work hard to make a difference. And so when, again, we were writing out the homepage story frame, we weren't writing the copy, but we could then use that to inform the copy. Talking about bringing out a distinct setting really helps you select photography. You can see here we included images of campus. And then down here, in terms of bringing memorable characters out to the site, we've got this section here called Leaders in Action where we're telling student stories. So you can click on each of these sections, it expands, it gives you a longer narrative. They help create memorable characters that become part of your institution's larger story. So the second way you can use your map to build better engagement is to use it to align your touch points, whether that's between print and digital, high touch versus high tech. Once you have the narrative that you want to tell as an institution, you can use the map to make sure that all of your touch points align to that story, whether that's the copy of photography on your website, your print pieces, even a student's in-person experience. We actually were working with one institution now where they have exceptionally high yield for students who visit campus, but their web content wasn't working quite as well to engage prospective students. So we started with an experience map, and we really looked for ways that we could bring a sense of being in person, of that campus visit to the website. We really wanted to bring a sense of place and a sense of people to their digital content. So, and we use the map to help us get there. The third way that you can use your map to build engagement is to help you identify any communication gaps. I've pulled this chart here from our 2018 myth-busting research, and you'll see what this figure shows us is the campus offices that teens want to communicate with during their admissions journey. So this one in particular, this is focused a bit more on the prospective undergraduate journey, but you'll see the chart is divided into these 4 phases: research, apply, decide and accept, commit, and transition. And what this tells us, not surprisingly, very early in that journey, students are very interested in communicating with admissions and financial aid. And later on, they're a little bit more interested maybe in that talking to professors and instructors, getting a sense of how they can prepare, what they need to do to get ready to be a student. So what this shows us is a few things. You know, it shows us who students are interested in communicating with. It also tells us that even in commit and transition, when you see interest sort of decline in communication, you're still seeing students at more than 50% interested in communicating with professors and instructors, meaning they still want to be communicated to, just their priorities and who they're talking to and what they're talking about has changed. So the priorities, student priorities may change in the different phases in terms of the kinds of information they're looking for and who they want to communicate with. But by looking at this chart against the experience map, you can start to plan holistically about how you want to communicate with students, when you want to communicate, and who they might want to be in touch with. It helps with that sort of holistic planning that we mentioned earlier. But I think it's also worth mentioning here that it's important to remember that students, while this represents different offices, students don't actually see your institution as a collection of offices. They're seeing your institution as a singular brand and a singular identity. And what that means is as they move from office to office, person to person, they're expecting that internal communication is happening and that you have some sense of what they've been communicated to before. It also means that they're expecting one clear and consistent voice across communications throughout the cycle. So the fourth way you can use your map is to just tell more meaningful stories. What is stories that answer students' top questions and content that is heart aligned? Again, it appeals to what they're feeling as well as what they're thinking. We just did a storytelling workshop with a client where we used an experience map as one of our tools to sort of help us find and tell better stories during the admission process. As a group, we brainstormed a number of stories that could be really compelling, and then we looked at the journey, we looked at the map, and we started to use that to filter out what would be the most meaningful, impactful, and relevant stories for this particular institution to tell its audience. What would matter the most to them? So again, the opportunity here is to tell stories that speak directly to phases of the journey. And just to give you a couple of quick examples of what that could look like, when I say story, what does that mean? It can be any number of things, but this is an example from Mills. These are alumni profiles that are on their homepage. So Mills is a small liberal arts college that we've worked with in Oakland, California. They attract a very sort of activist-minded student. So a student's questions that Mills students typically have, or prospective Mills students, that sort of right fit student there, would be, is this a place that's going to help me make a difference? And what kind of a person am I going to become if I go here? So we chose to address those directly on the homepage with these alumni profiles. And you can see here just a bit, we picked two very accomplished and successful alumni, but what this does is it really answers that question directly of, here's how you can make a difference, here are the kinds of people who've graduated our institution, so you can get a sense of who you might become as well. This is a very different format here, but just to share a second example, this is from USC School of Social Work we worked with fairly recently, and this is a full feature story that they published in the news section of their site. And it's about a current student there who is using dance as a form of therapy and community building. So it talks about what he's studying and how he's using what he's learned in the classroom outside the classroom to start to make a difference in his community. And what this does is this answers questions that prospective social work students have, which is, how can I use my education to make people's lives better? Well, we're going to show you how with this story. And then it also answers just a more general question that all prospective students have. Am I going to fit in here? Are my values aligned with this institution's values and vice versa? So the fifth way that you can use your map is really to organize your content for impact. So along with telling better stories, where can you actually put your content? How can you organize it in a way that's going to be really effective? So this is a chart from our 2016 myth-busting research. What you'll see here is that we asked prospective students, what are the biggest weaknesses of college websites? And what they told us is that the top two biggest weaknesses were, first, it was difficult to get around the site and find the information they were looking for. And when they did find content, the content didn't answer their questions. And you'll see the light blue bar below. We actually asked marketing and admissions professionals the same thing, and you can see their top results were the same, which tells me that institutions know that this is a pain point. You guys know that this may be a problem for your site, for example. The map can be a tool to help you start to address that pain point. Once you know what your audience's top questions and concerns are, you can organize your site structure to get them to the information they're looking for faster and easier. Again, I'm thinking of program pages as a great example. We know from the map that one of the top questions in Understand and Explore is, what programs am I interested? Do you have my major? Do you have the program I'm looking for? They're all kind of sides to the same question, but really it's, do you have the program I'm looking for? So if you know that that's a top question and you know that it's happening early in the prospective student journey, that means that it's going to be a question that's on students' mind probably the very first time they're visiting your institution's site. So what that tells us is it might be really important, for example, it might be really important to your institution to make sure that there's a very clear pathway to that program information from your homepage. And maybe you want to build multiple pathways. Maybe you want to look at the labels and how students actually figure out how they're going to get from the homepage to their academic program information. So that's just one example of how you can use program pages, just one example, but sort of the high level here is figure out what students' priorities are and then adjust your site and your site structure accordingly. Next, you can use the map to help you refine your communication channel mix. This is another chart from our most recent 2018 myth-busting research. What this shows is channel preferences throughout the journey, and we can see that they change here. So we see that email is something that becomes extremely important and preferred early in the journey, and then it takes a little dip after a student's actually been accepted. But we see at that point of I got in and I've decided to go here, we see other kinds of communication become a little bit more important. So you can take this chart and sort of put it next to the experience map to figure out what channels do you want to use to communicate with students in particular phases. For instance, we know, for instance, that social is really important early on. Maybe you can see here on the site, maybe students don't necessarily want to be contacted directly through social, but they're going to be exploring your social to get all your social media channels to get that sense of like, is this the right place for me? Am I going to fit in here? And then again, in that decide and accept phase, when they're trying to figure out where are my friends going, who are the other people that have decided to go to this institution, so the map can really help you make choices about where to put your resources and when, and again, start to plan holistically for the entire journey so that you're getting the right content to your audience at the right time and in the right place. And then finally, the map can help you plan for meaningful measurement. And what I mean here is it really helps us shift our thinking about from measuring page views to measuring how students are moving through the prospective student journey. So on the one side here, we've got our page metrics, our page center metrics, things like page views, number of sessions, pages per session, session duration. And that's important. Want to capture that. You don't want to stop those efforts, but the map helps us start to move to more customer-centered metrics, specifically looking at the actions that take place and what are your key conversions, helps us start to think about how can we measure whether or not students are moving through the journey? How do we know if they're moving from one phase to the next? And that might be starting to measure things like submitting requests for information, seeing if students are attending virtual events, seeing whether they're using your site to schedule campus visits. Are they scheduling their interviews? And are they clicking, for instance, something like start application? It's really taking your mindset from, okay, it's important to measure what's actually happening on the page, but it's more meaningful. It's going to give me more context for what's happening and what a student's doing. If I can figure out what are those key things that tell me whether or not they're moving from one phase to the next. So those are the 7 ways that you can use your map, but let's talk about a little bit more concretely in terms of you've got a few projects ahead of you. When's the best time to use the map? When's the most appropriate time to start pulling it in? Well, the time that we at mStoner, the time we probably use experience maps more than anything else is really at the beginning of a website redesign. I mentioned that it could be a great tool to build alignment, to start capturing institutional knowledge, and to set priorities. That can be really helpful to do right at the beginning of a website redesign when you're in that early planning and strategy phase. So, but in addition to that, you don't necessarily need to be doing a full website redesign for the map to be really helpful and valuable. If you're doing a smaller project, maybe you want to experiment with feature stories or try a more targeted email campaign. Again, the map can help you figure out, okay, we're doing feature stories. Is it going to support a phase of the student journey? Is it going to be tied to a specific phase? We want to make sure it's delivered at a certain time. And again, with that email campaign, what messages are we sending students? Is it relevant to the phase that they're in? And looking at the messages as a whole, what's the story that we're telling about our institution? Is it cohesive? Is there something missing that we need to emphasize a little bit more? Next, I think the map is incredibly valuable when you're doing a content audit. Maybe it's just spring cleaning, it's time, you haven't looked at your web content in a while, you're like, what do we have here? So you go and you do a content audit and you're saying, okay, now I have a sense of what I have. Let me look at the map and make sure, does the content I have support the student journey? Is there content here that we're missing? Is there something that we need to start addressing a certain phase of the journey that we really feel like is missing from their site? Do we have content that maybe isn't really supporting the student journey, but it seems to be located with all this other prospective student information that can really tell you maybe we need to move this content to a different part of the site, or maybe it's really not helpful and not relevant anymore. Maybe it's time to archive this content. So again, content audit can be a great time to use your map. The next, and this is actually the time, the instance that we hear people using the map more than anything else, is to build their editorial calendar. Again, because it tells you what messages to communicate and specifically when, because you want to tie those messages to the student journey again. Make sure it's happening, make sure it's reaching your audience in the right phase. And then finally, the map can be really helpful in your personalization efforts. If any of you out there have started thinking about personalization, maybe you're interested in trying it, you want to know if it's right for your institution, the map can be really helpful during this conversation as well, because it really helps you think about, okay, we know that content personalization, having personalized content on your site or in emails, we know that's a really big content lift. It requires a ton of planning. It requires a ton of content production. It also requires a lot of tagging and taxonomy. So if you're going to put your time and resources into an effort like personalization, it's really important to look at the map and figure out at what point in the journey is personalization going to be meaningful? When is it going to make a difference to a prospective student? When is it going to help move them from one phase to the next? And I think that really brings us to what the overarching function is of the map and the way that it's the most useful. Anytime you're planning for creating, distributing content for prospective students, you want to make sure that it supports that student journey, that move from one phase to the next. So that's really where the value of the map comes in. And again, so anytime you're thinking about content, planning content, developing content, use the map to start asking yourself the question, how does this support the experience? Is it during understand and explore? Is it during narrow choices and apply? Is it going to help prospective students move through that decide and accept phase? Is it going to really support that journey from becoming an admitted student to being a current student? How does the content support the experience? So these are just a couple of instances in which it's incredibly valuable to use the map. I would encourage you, anytime you're thinking about content, to pull the map in, tweak it to your needs, customize it for your institution. And now I'm going to hand it back to Mallory, who's going to talk about a couple more resources and guide us through our Q&A. Mallory, back to you.
Hey, thanks, Shannon. That was a really interesting and I hope inspiring session for folks. I mean, from what I've seen on Twitter, at the very least, it looks like you've given our attendees a lot of great ideas to help improve prospective student marketing and communications. So like Shannon said, before moving into Q&A, I'd love to talk briefly about a few helpful and additional resources that should help augment and extend the information that she covered today. So first, dive deeper. Shannon wrote a great blog post that covers 5 content marketing ideas for recruiting students. The reality is creating fresh and engaging content is difficult. So once you've gone through an experience mapping process, the ideas that Shannon shares in this post will likely inspire you to find new ways to connect with your prospective students and align it back to your experience map. Second, if you're attending today's session because you're gearing up for a website redesign, you will definitely find our curated collection of redesigned focus resources helpful. You will get access to a best-in-class RFP, research with prospective students, our on-demand redesign done right webinar, and more. And I should mention that research is the myth-busting research that Shannon has been incorporating throughout today's session. So it's great if you haven't checked it out yet. There's 3 years that you'll get access to. And of course, we would love to explore partnership opportunities with you to help you build your custom experience maps or better digitally engage your prospective students. And sometimes it's helpful just to bounce ideas around. So I'm going to share a link that gives you some options for getting in touch with us. But of course, you're also welcome to just shoot me an email to kick off the conversation too. All right, Shannon, let's move into questions. I've got a lot of great ones for you, but one that I've gotten a few times actually from some of our attendees is, when do you need to build multiple experience maps? Can the map, the starter map that you just shared, I mean, can that really be used for every type of prospective student, or do we need to, further segment?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question, and I think it's one we talk about a lot. I would say, really, you want to create a map for each audience that you're interested in unpacking. So I mentioned, for example, University of Montreal. They were really they're interested in their prospective student journey, but they wanted to learn more about the international student journey. And we do see some differences in terms of behaviors and trusted resources that can be really specific, for instance, to international students. So I would say, sort of high level view, one map per audience. And then from there, you can decide, are there specific segments within that audience that you really want to capture and learn more about? We did that, for instance, with Mendoza. We looked at some different business student segments and kind of teased out some nuances there that ended up being really valuable.
Awesome. So I'm going to try and paraphrase, because I've gotten a few questions around how we've built this starter map. So I'd like to share some information on that since a number of people asked. So this starter map was built from years of research with our clients, as well as the myth-busting research that we've been conducting. So for example, the questions that are listed under the thoughts section or the items within the feelings section. These are the most common, most typical things that we've heard from many types of institutions when they are approaching communication and marketing strategy with their prospective undergraduate students. And the same goes with trusted resources. In fact, that was directly informed by our myth-busting research over the last 3 years. So this map should really help you hit the ground running. I had a few people send me messages like, hey, for a starter map, this is pretty comprehensive. And and I agree, it is. We really wanted to give you a tool that you could take and start using on Friday. But the reality is, and Shannon, I'd love to hear you kind of sound off on this a bit, but I think further customization has to happen because there are so many nuances about individual institutions, their processes, the types of students they're looking to attract. And of course, we could not capture your prospective student audience within this map. Shannon, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say I think we see meaningful differences, especially if you're looking at applying to medical school versus business school. If you're looking specifically, you really want to focus on undergraduate experience versus graduate experience. I think we start to see enough nuances that the map becomes more valuable if you can tease out what those differences are, tease out what's really specific. For instance, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, we know a lot of times community college students and even sometimes transfer students can get stuck in that first loop. If you'll remember from the map, the first set of actions is circular because students can spend anywhere from months to years in that cycle trying to figure out, is this even the right time to go to school? So I think that's a reason to really take the map and customize it for your particular audience. Who are you trying to reach? Who are you trying to communicate with?
Yeah. And so as a really great follow-up, Shannon, we've also gotten a few questions, around how to actually go about that customization. And I know you touched really quickly on an experience map workshop as a great way to do that, and that workshop's probably going to be informed by both one-on-one conversations with your target audience or focus groups, and the knowledge that people internally have built up about communicating with them. Shannon, can you give us a little more insight into how one actually goes about hosting an experience map workshop?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned, user interviews and that sort of one-on-one. That's usually where we'll start in terms of a lot of research. We'll talk to students specifically and find out, what is a student who ended up at this institution? What were they thinking? What were they feeling as they were applying? We also, in terms of hosting the workshop, what we do there is we try to bring in our key stakeholders from different departments. That could be anything from it might include deans, it sometimes includes faculty, it includes admissions, student life. We're really trying to capture, and marketing and communications, of course, we're really trying to capture who has an interest in this project, for example, if it's a website redesign, and what kinds of institutional knowledge do they have that can be really valuable in helping us tease out specific opportunities, or to help us really kind of decide what the priorities of the project are going to be, what the nuances are. It helps us sort of again, collect and synthesize that institutional knowledge, bring it together, put it in one place. It really helps us break down the silos between departments as well. So in terms of how the workshop actually happens from there, a lot of times we'll bring people into a room and we'll facilitate the workshop. We'll give people sticky notes. You saw in the Mendoza pictures, and Sharpies, and they'll write down ideas for key messages and opportunities. We'll start sticking them up on the board in which phase they exist in. Then we sort of step back and look at, okay, where are the themes? Where are we starting to see some consensus build? What are some outliers? How is that relevant to the ideas that we've captured here? And just start to use that as a way to prioritize our goals for a particular project.
Yeah. So Will asked, can you have too many cooks in the kitchen when you're doing this? I think that's a great question.
The short answer is yes. I think it's important to really think about who is going to be valuable in terms of adding information to your project. At the same time, if you're bringing 50 people in for one experience map workshop, you're going to have way too many people, and you're going to start capturing the same knowledge over and over again. It's not going to be an effective use of people's time. A lot of times we look at something like roughly around 6 to 10 as being a really great place to start. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger. Occasionally we'll break workshops into morning and afternoon sessions to make sure that we're including all the right people.
Cool. And as far as tools go for actually creating these experience maps, I'm honestly not even sure what mStoner uses. So what are the details there?
Yeah, we've used a number of things. I think Adobe Illustrator has ended up being probably the most helpful go-to tool in terms of really tailoring the map, making it really visual, making it really beautiful and elegant. I would encourage you to explore that. For instance, sometimes if you don't have somebody who already knows how to use Illustrator, even using something like Keynote and PowerPoint, which most people have access to, whether you're using Mac or PC, you can use that to start building the actual experience map. We've actually started experimenting with a tool called Whimsical. It's a brand new web app to help us start to put experience maps together. So there are a number of tools out there. I would say if you're looking for one to really just start with that's fairly easy, I would look at like a Keynote and a PowerPoint.
Yep. I've also had a few questions about, how do you identify where a prospective student is within this journey? Is there any, key indicators? And so the thing that comes to mind immediately for me is higher ed, we're lucky we have the academic calendar, and that helps push people through. But is there anything else that you would note?
Yeah, I would say if you're looking at like a traditional undergrad, the calendar, what month is it? That's really going to be your biggest indicator. In terms of audiences that might not be moving through the funnel in a predictable way, things like graduate students, transfer students, community college students, I would say looking at those, we mentioned some customer-centered metrics, things like, are they requesting information? Well, we know they're probably early to mid. Are they starting to look at how to visit campus? Are they scheduling their campus visits? Maybe they're in that narrow choices and apply phase. And then, I think something like actually clicking start application, that's the piece that's going to suggest they're moving from from narrow choices and apply to decide and accept. So it's really about finding those customer-centered metrics and, you know, figuring out that that'll sort of give you the indication of what phase a prospective student is in, if it's not obvious from the calendar.
Sure. So oftentimes at institutions, you know, as much as I think we all appreciated your note that prospective students see the brand and not siloed offices. The reality is we work in siloed offices, and sometimes communicating with prospective students can, you know, that responsibility can be split up between maybe an enrollment and admissions team versus a marketing communications team. During the, you know, a mapping exercise, or as an institution starts to really implement an experience map, do you have any recommendations on you know, how those offices can come together to build out an ideal communication mix that is going to effectively target these students?
Yeah, I think that can be a great reason to start with that collaborative experience map workshop. Maybe it's between two specific departments that need to tackle a project together, or who are handing off communication at a specific point in the journey. I think that's a really valuable way to sort of build the map together and use it as a shared tool to make sure that we've done that sort of holistic planning, that we know at which point who owns what content, who owns what communication, where the handoff is, what students know when that handoff occurs. That can help you plan, I think, sort of across the different phases. Does that answer the question you're asking, Mallory?
Yeah, I think it does. And Colleen was the one who asked it. So Colleen, if you have any more nuance you want to add, feel free to shoot that over to me in the Q&A and we'll circle back. We had someone ask, and I can answer this one, if we've done any starter experience maps for other audiences. And we have one for donors as well. And I'd be happy to share that with this attendee group too. So keep an eye out for that and I'll happily share it. I also got a note from an attendee that maybe that download experience map link on the slide might not be working. I would say make sure you capitalize the E and the M, although Erin, I bet you already knew that. But if anyone's trying to type that into their browser, the capital E and M is kind of key with a bit.ly link, right? So we will definitely make this available to you though on Friday as well. Another question for you, Shannon. How does the communication change in a pull versus a push situation? You know, so in other words, the student is actively asking for information versus maybe an institution's obtained their email address through a search, you know, firm, and they're trying to send and kind of push the messages or direct mail to those students.
I'd say, you know, if that's the direction that you're going to go to really use the map to figure out, is this information that students are looking for? I think that's the first question to ask yourself. If they're reaching out to you, you're going to know that, yes, this is information that they want and need. If you are approaching them, I'd say the map is a great tool to compare it against the map and say, is this going to be valuable to students? Is it going to be something they want and need?
Yeah, great.
Is that kind of what you were getting at in terms of, yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's always going to be those stealth prospects, right?
Yeah.
Who aren't going to identify themselves regardless of where they're at up until the application. So
yeah.
I think the experience map is probably helpful because it'll ensure that the key information addressing their thoughts and feelings is being surfaced and easily discovered during those stages for those types. We had a really great question about are experience maps the same as customer journeys? And so I'd love to address this question for you, Sandra. A customer journey map is a little different than an experience map. So the journey map is going to be the right tool. Think when you know where you want to focus. So you know, it could be one very specific journey. I've got a hospital example actually. So say a hospital is trying to better understand the experience someone goes through with radiology. You could give very specific feedback on where patients are getting frustrated in that one very specific experience. And then, you know, you would know with a customer journey map where to target to build better patient outcomes or maybe loyalty. But it's, a customer journey map is going to be that very specific case and almost, no help to other departments, say, in that hospital. Whereas an experience map is going to be really great when maybe you don't know where the problem is. So maybe there's friction occurring between some of those stages and you're seeing, a lot of requests for information, but then the number of applications or submitted applications really drops. So you don't know where, what's happening in between that first stage and maybe the second and the third. So the experience map is going to be really helpful in that case. And, zeroing in on only one journey within the relationship might cause you to miss other needs that are really critical. Shannon, anything else you'd add to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Cool. Hey, I have to say I've been studying these things a lot lately. So hopefully that helps you out, Sandra. All right, let me do a quick check just to see if we have any other questions. I know we're past the top of the hour, folks. Thanks for sticking around. Let's see. Any suggestions, Shannon, on how to link the customer experience map around a larger change management initiative? Ooh, that's a great question.
That is a great question, and it's a tricky one. I would say what it can do is it can help you start to pinpoint where the pain points are. So something that we've seen occasionally sometimes is, what we start to hear when we're building experience maps collaboratively in a workshop, we'll start to hear clients express how difficult or frustrating it is to make sure that students have really clear financial aid information, or that the application process is really confusing and students get lost somewhere in that process. And sometimes that's a problem with the website, and sometimes it's a larger problem with internal communication, internal process. I would say the map is a great starting point in terms of identifying where you want to see change happen. I think that's sort of what its role is in larger change management initiatives.
Cool. Well, thank you, Shannon, so much for all of your insights and for leading such a terrific presentation. Folks, thanks for sticking with us through the Q&A. Happy Wednesday. We hope that you'll join us for our next webinar. Keep an eye out. We'll be announcing that sometime soon. And please don't forget, 3 minutes, right? Please fill out that short exit survey. We would so appreciate it. All right, all. Have a wonderful afternoon and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.